Hello and welcome to Squatchbot.com. I'm Darrin Smith, and I hope that all of you out there are doing okay and that you and your loved ones are well. This morning I was gearing up and was planning on heading back into the field around Avocado Lake. However, Mother Nature had other plans. I received an emergency alert this morning, warning of an approaching storm. So I decided it was best to hunker down at home and to prepare the house for the approaching storm and also for the approaching winter season. However, I am very interested in getting back into the field around Avocado Lake because after posting that previous video with my FLIR footage analysis, I have received a number of messages from researchers who were showing interest in that footage. The FLIR footage being discussed is the FLIR footage I obtained while investigating the Avocado Lake area. To be clear, I am in 100% agreement that this is absolutely a blob squatch. However, I do think it does have some noteworthy characteristics that should be shared, and which I believe strongly demonstrates that this figure was very likely an animate being and not an environmental anomaly. I was hearing movement in the brush that evening, and I was also smelling a very strong odor that smelt like rotting meat. This area has had a lot of recent activity, and based on this open discussion, I do find this footage intriguing. What researchers are noting in the footage, which I find relevant, is the general size and shape of the figure, and the fact that it was walking upright. Also noted, the forward angled movement was confirmed, which supports the motion of the figure was not the result of the camera's movement, and the angled ascent is consistent with the hillside environment. Another physical characteristic which raised an eyebrow was a possible sagittal crest. Similar to gorillas and orangutans, Sasquatch are often noted as having a slightly cone-shaped head. Also compelling was the figure's subjective knee bend and leg angle. Studies of the Patterson-Gimlin film footage from 1967, as well as other various credible Sasquatch photographic evidence, conclude that the Sasquatch has a very unusual gait, which includes a very dramatic knee bend. Lastly, another discussion anomaly noted on the FLIR footage was a temperature variance on the figure's proposed head region that some suggest is a contrast that possibly demonstrates a face with a more exposed skin, thus a hotter temperature reading. Granted, this film footage does nothing to prove the existence of Sasquatch. However, the analysis and open dialogue has raised some enthusiasm that the figure in question does have some very compelling physical characteristics, and it may indeed indicate the Sasquatch are in the Avocado Lake area. I've mentioned this numerous times on previous videos that although I try to take a grounded approach when conducting my Sasquatch research, I absolutely keep an open mind to the possibilities because frankly we don't know what these creatures are. And I do know that there's a lot of you out there who believe that the Sasquatch are some sort of supernatural being, whether an extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or even some sort of spirit animal, and I absolutely respect all of those theories. In fact, I have had some very unusual happenings occur while conducting Sasquatch research that I would absolutely place in the paranormal category. In fact, I've been reviewing a lot of the audio and the video from my Sasquatch encounter last March, and I've come to some rather shocking realizations that the Sasquatch may be using infrasounds. For those of you who may be new to my channel, I'll offer a brief recap of the incident I mentioned, and I'll also add a link here to the encounter video. On March 3rd, 2020, I was conducting Sasquatch research in an area along the California Sierra Nevada mountains, near where I had recently discovered possible Sasquatch tracks. As I pulled into the area, I heard a very loud, unmistakable Sasquatch vocalization coming from the embankment above me. I am very familiar with the proposed Sasquatch vocalizations that have been obtained over the years, and their subjective vocalization capabilities, and the sound I heard while pulling into the area absolutely fit the bill of a Sasquatch vocalization. Disappointed I did not have an audio recorder on as I pulled into the area, I quickly got out of my vehicle and began recording using my parabolic microphone. While I listened, I could clearly hear grunting and soft whooping sounds coming from the embankment above me, and I also captured some very compelling audio recordings. The following audio clip, you will hear some guttural primate-like noises, followed by a loud knocking sound, and then a primate-like huff. There is still a lot of discussion as to how the Sasquatch generate the common knocking sounds often observed. They could be hitting a tree or log with a stick, or there's a lot of discussion that the sound could actually be a vocalization, or the result of chest slapping. A note here, while conducting a follow-up investigation of this encounter, I did discover possible strike marks on a tree where I concluded the Sasquatch was located during this initial encounter. As I stood there listening and recording, the Sasquatch began to move away. I could clearly hear bipedal movement leaving the area. On this clip, you will hear it moving, and as it does, its fourth step lands in snow, which makes a distinct crunching sound. At this point, I had to make a decision. Do I stay put and continue trying to collect audio evidence, or do I go after it with the hopes of collecting photographic evidence? I chose the latter. I grabbed some additional equipment and then powered up the embankment and began following the creature through the woods, using the parabolic microphone to pinpoint the creature's location. Eventually, I was led down a forested hillside and into an area of very heavy brush. As I pulled into the area, I could hear a distraught bird screeching incessantly in an area of clustered trees and heavy brush, the same general area I believe the creature was hiding, based on my pursuits using the parabolic microphone. As I moved into the area, this cluster of heavily shaded trees and thick brush was creating a lot of anxiety for me, because I couldn't see so far into it. So I chose not to approach it, and I pulled slightly away from it and to its left, and began using the parabolic microphone again to see if I can pinpoint the creature's location. While initially reviewing the footage and audio of this encounter, I made a startling discovery, which strongly supports that the creature I had followed was indeed hiding in that very tree cluster I had feared. Also, while reviewing the audio recordings obtained from that area, a very strange tapping sound could be heard coming from the shadowed tree cluster, and also from somewhere behind me. I don't believe I actually heard this tapping sound as it occurred, because I had just switched off the parabolic microphone. However, I was still wearing the headphones. However, clearly looking at the footage, something was not right, and I was starting to feel a little unsettled. Unwilling to move into the shadowed tree cluster area or push through the thick brush, I decided to try to move around the brush and tree cluster, hoping for a safer vantage point to gain access to that area. However, as I pushed through the snow and approached the area where I believe the creature was hiding, I was suddenly overwhelmed with an incredible sense of terror, a terror I have never experienced in my life before. And I came to the immediate conclusion that I had to get out of there. The sense of fear I was experiencing was completely irrational and overwhelming, an emotional response that is supposedly characteristic of infrasound bombardment. We do know there are animals that use infrasounds. If Sasquatch also has this ability, I do not find it out of the realm of possibility that they would use it as a passive defense mechanism to push people away from them. And the sudden irrational terror I experienced could have been an example of this. Fleeing the area, I retreated up the embankment into a location that was still close enough for me to observe the area, however, a place I felt had me out of harm's way. There, I continued to monitor the area. Using the parabolic microphone, I could still hear the screeching bird, which continued its ruckus for probably another half an hour after I had left that area. And at that point, I figured the Sasquatch had moved on. After I remained in the area for a considerable time, I decided it was time for me to head back towards my vehicle. And it was then that I discovered that my GPS unit had malfunctioned, and it was completely powered down. I had done an equipment check prior to heading out into the field, and the GPS unit was working perfectly, and had fresh batteries. And before I began following the creature into the woods, I made certain this device was turned on and working. During my follow-up investigation of this incident, I discovered that the GPS unit was actually the fourth piece of equipment that had unexplainably malfunctioned that day. Or had it. After I had posted my videos of this encounter and the subsequent follow-up investigations I had done in the area, one viewer asked me if I had experienced any missing time. Concluding the reasoning for this inquiry was to ascertain whether or not I was subjected to some sort of mind control or debilitation, I disregarded the inquiry on the grounds that I found it very hard to believe I could have lost consciousness at any time during this encounter, because I was consistently on my feet during this incident, only sitting down later while monitoring the area, and I really didn't experience anything that would suggest I was under any sort of mind control or the like. However, I absolutely acknowledge the irrational fear I had experienced was completely out of the norm, and I also noted that my perception of time that afternoon seemed askew, only because the day seemed to have passed much faster than normal. I chalked this off as the elevated adrenaline I had experienced. However, after reviewing the video and the audio from that incident, I discovered something rather shocking. As I stood near the shadowed tree cluster, and before moving into the heavy brush, I did something rather odd, something I did not recall having done. I turned to look at my GPS unit, I'm guessing to make sure that the unit was working properly before I continued. However, at closer inspection of this footage, it appears that I may have done something truly horrific. Reviewing the footage, it looks as though I may have actually turned off the GPS unit. So for sure there are a lot of unanswered questions regarding the incident that occurred last March. However, I'm absolutely convinced that I had encountered Sasquatch that day. The vocalization I heard as I pulled into the area was unmistakable, and the subsequent audio that I did record was also very conclusive. And although I do try to keep a grounded approach with my research, I must say that there are some very strange happenings that occurred that day that absolutely defy explanation. As I mentioned previously, during this encounter I experienced a number of unexplainable equipment failures, besides the GPS unit. Later, upon reviewing the various audio and video recording devices, I actually discovered files that were completely missing on both audio recorders as well as my video camera. I have never experienced anything like this before, and now I have 3 pieces of technology experiencing the same unexplainable technology failure, and I have absolutely no understanding how it happened or even how it was possible. From my understanding, the only way files could be deleted in such a manner would be if someone had gained access to the device and actually deleted the various files manually. Also, I have never really bought into the idea that Sasquatch has the ability to use infrasounds to incapacitate or confuse their pursuers. However, I can absolutely attest to the irrational fear I had experienced as I moved into the area where I believe the Sasquatch was hiding was definitely something out of the ordinary. And if I did indeed switch off my GPS unit, I have no recollection of doing so, and it is not something I would have done in my right mind. As I mentioned in a previous video, July 4th, 2020, a 54-year-old woman had gone missing in the Sierra National Forest, in very close proximity to the area I had my encounter with the Sasquatch last March. This woman has Forest Service training, and she was self-isolating in the area due to the COVID-19 outbreak. On 4th of July weekend, her camp was discovered in shambles, and her vehicle was crashed in a ravine a short distance away. Search and rescue crews were called in, and they scoured the woods for weeks, during which time the woman was spotted twice, moving through the forest barefoot and in what was described as a dazed state. Then on September 4th, the creek fire broke out, and it began its destructive rampage on the forest, eventually spreading through that entire area. The 54-year-old woman was never discovered and could still be wandering the forest. What I find very concerning, this woman's behavior was noted as being very out of character for her, and the eyewitness testimony suggested that she was not in her right mind. Also, her ransacked camp raised immediate concerns. There are 3 reports filed of eyewitnesses observing Sasquatch ransacking camps along the California Sierra Nevada mountains. Also, another thing that concerns me greatly, this woman's movement suggested she was headed towards an area where I believe the Sasquatch reside during the summer months. After my personal encounter with the Sasquatch in that area and the unusual happenings, I am very concerned this woman was abducted by the Sasquatch, and I am also very much open to the possibility that the Sasquatch do use infrasounds to deter potential threats and possibly even altering behavior. I'm Darrin Smith, and I'll see you here next time on SquatchBot.com.